An entitled HOA Karen decided to report her neighbor's dying trees, demanding the HOA take action against the supposed hazard. The hilarious twist? Her neighbor was the HOA's official arborist, who then used his power to inspect her property, uncovering over $10,000 in mandatory violations she was forced to pay. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more instant karma. Alex, a man whose life is quite literally rooted in his passion. He is a certified arborist, a title he earned through years of study, practice, and a genuine love for all things botanical. For over 2 decades, he has been what one might call a tree doctor, diagnosing illnesses, performing delicate surgeries with saws and shears, and generally ensuring the longevity and health of the silent, leafy giants that watch over our world. It's not just a job for him. It's a calling. His hands, calloused from bark and soil, are more comfortable assessing the health of an ancient oak than they are typing on a keyboard. He understands the subtle language of leaves, the stories told by rings and roots, and he has built a successful business and a sterling reputation on this expertise. This background is crucial because it sets the stage for a conflict where one party brings an opinion to a fight and the other brings a lifetime of professional, certified facts, and we all know which one usually wins. Alex and his wife live in a picturesque neighborhood, the kind with neat lawns, friendly waves between neighbors, and a homeowners association that is, for the most part, a force for good. The HOA is active, sure, but generally reasonable. They maintain the common areas, ensure the community pool is clean, and mediate the occasional dispute about fence heights or trash can etiquette. A few years prior to our story, in a move that can only be described as a beautiful foreshadowing of fate, the HOA board decided they needed a professional on retainer to handle the community's arboricultural needs. They needed an expert to inspect the trees in the parks and along the boulevards, to offer guidance to residents, and to be the final word in any tree-related disagreements. And who better to hire than the highly respected certified arborist who already lived in their very neighborhood? Alex was their man. It was a perfect arrangement. He provided his services to the HOA at a generous discount, happy to apply his craft in his own community. In return, he received a steady, reliable contract that was, quite literally, right in his own backyard. It was a symbiotic relationship that had worked flawlessly for years. Most of his neighbors knew his profession. His own yard served as a living testament to his skills. It wasn't a yard so much as a personal arboretum. The centerpiece consisted of several magnificent, mature oak trees that were the envy of the block. These weren't just trees to Alex. They were his pride and joy, his living sculptures. They were meticulously cared for, their canopies expertly pruned to promote health and elegant growth. They were, by any measure, perfect specimens, and one of the primary reasons he and his wife had fallen in love with and purchased their home. For years, life was peaceful, a quiet suburban harmony. But harmony, as we know, is a fragile thing, and into this peaceful ecosystem, a new invasive species was about to be introduced. Her name was Brenda. Brenda's arrival was less of a gentle integration into the community and more of a hostile takeover of the neighborhood's tranquility. According to Alex, the moving van's engine was still warm in her driveway when the first volley of complaints was fired. It started small, as it so often does with people of her disposition. The first target was the placement of Alex's trash cans. On trash day they were, for a period of approximately 2 hours between being emptied and being brought in, visible from the street. This, in Brenda's eyes, was a cardinal sin against suburban aesthetics, and it warranted a passive-aggressive note left on their front door, written in a spiky, judgmental script. Alex and his wife, seasoned adults who understood that life contains bigger problems than a briefly visible recycling bin, simply rolled their eyes and moved on. But Brenda was just warming up. The next offense was the sound of children's laughter. On a bright Saturday afternoon, Alex's kids were playing in their own backyard. Their gleeful shouts and the thud of a soccer ball were, to Brenda, an excessive and disruptive cacophony that shattered her peace. Another note followed, this one more pointed. The campaign of petty grievances continued to escalate. The welcome mat on Alex's porch, a cheerful splash of color, was deemed to clash with the neighborhood's established aesthetic palette. It was a level of nitpicking so absurd it was almost impressive. Alex and his wife adopted a strategy of polite, detached ignorance. They would smile, wave, and refuse to be drawn into her vortex of manufactured misery. It was clear that Brenda was a person who thrived on conflict and drama, and they were determined not to provide her with either. They would not play her game, but Brenda was not to be deterred. Having failed to gain traction with complaints about trash cans, children, and decor, she scanned her neighbor's property for a new, more significant target. And then, her gaze fell upon the magnificent, healthy, perfectly maintained oak trees. And in that moment, she made the single greatest strategic blunder of her meddlesome career. Having exhausted her list of minor, inconsequential grievances, Brenda set her sights on a bigger target, one she believed would surely get the HOA's attention and establish her dominance in the neighborhood hierarchy. She chose to attack the very heart of Alex's professional pride, his trees. This was a declaration of war, though at the time, only one side knew it. For Alex, his trees were more than just landscape features. They were a representation of his life's work, a daily source of joy and satisfaction. To have their health and safety questioned by anyone would have been irksome, but to have it questioned by a layperson, an amateur with a grudge, was a profound insult. Brenda began her campaign subtly, with pointed stares and slow, disapproving headshakes as she retrieved her mail. But soon, her amateur analysis grew into a full-blown, albeit entirely fictional, diagnosis. She had decided, with the unshakable confidence of the utterly ignorant, that Alex's trees were a menace. They were, in her expert opinion, dying. They were diseased. Their branches were poised to snap at any moment, ready to crash down upon her house, her car, her prize-winning, in her mind, petunias. It was a narrative she constructed from a potent combination of arrogance and boredom. She saw normal seasonal leaf drop and called it blight. She saw the natural, rugged texture of the bark and interpreted it as rot. She saw strong, healthy limbs swaying in the wind and saw a catastrophic structural failure waiting to happen. Brenda had appointed herself the neighborhood's watchdog, and she had found her wolf in the form of a perfectly healthy oak tree. Alex and his wife initially dismissed her mutterings and glares as just another facet of her unpleasant personality. They had done nothing wrong. Their trees were in immaculate condition, and they assumed that even Brenda wasn't audacious enough to formalize such a baseless complaint. They underestimated her. They underestimated the boundless depths of a true Karen's entitlement and her unwavering belief in her own righteousness. And so, while Alex continued to professionally care for his arboreal masterpieces, Brenda was busy gathering her evidence, preparing to escalate her petty neighborhood squabble into an official, HOA-sanctioned conflict. She had no idea who she was dealing with. She was about to bring a water pistol to a naval battle. The official declaration of war arrived not as a note on the door, but as a sleek, digital missile fired directly into Alex's inbox. One afternoon, while reviewing work emails, a particular subject line caught his eye. It was from the HOA board, and it read, "Official complaint, hazardous trees at 123 Maple Street." Alex felt a cold knot form in his stomach, which quickly melted into a hot surge of indignation. 123 Maple Street was his address. He knew, with a certainty that needed no proof, the source of the complaint. It was Brenda. He opened the email. What he found within was not a simple one-line complaint. It was a work of literary fiction, a carefully crafted narrative of imminent doom. The complaint had been forwarded from a concerned neighbor, who had chosen to remain anonymous. The classic coward's gambit. The text was a masterwork of alarmist language. It claimed that his beautiful, healthy oak trees were clearly dying. It described their robust branches as dangerously overgrown and threatening to fall at any moment. The complaint painted a vivid picture of a severe and imminent risk to property and life, using every buzzword designed to provoke an immediate and panicked response from a homeowners association. Brenda had clearly spent time on this. She had weaponized her vocabulary to transform a work of nature's art into a ticking time bomb. To add a veneer of credibility to her claims, she had attached a series of photographs. The photos, taken from the vantage point of her second-story window, were a study in manipulative framing and digital alteration. The angles were deliberately chosen to make the tree canopies look menacing and unbalanced. She had cranked up the contrast settings to an absurd degree, turning the natural shadows and crevices in the bark into dark, sinister patches that, to an untrained eye, could easily be mistaken for decay and rot. It was a dishonest, malicious, and frankly, pathetic attempt to manufacture a crisis. Alex stared at the email, a mixture of fury and disbelief washing over him. The sheer audacity was breathtaking. This woman, his new neighbor, had not only decided to harass him but had done so by attacking his professional integrity in the most public way available to her. The game had changed. This was no longer about ignoring a miserable person. This was about defending his reputation. As Alex finished reading Brenda's dramatic and deeply dishonest complaint, his anger began to subside, replaced by a slow-dawning sense of cosmic amusement. He scrolled down past the fabricated evidence and alarmist prose to the official message from the HOA board. The board's response was, as always, polite, professional, and strictly procedural. It was a standard form letter, the kind they sent out for any number of resident issues. But in this specific context, the boilerplate text became a thing of comedic genius. The email stated, "As per our community guidelines, all tree-related complaints must be assessed by our certified arborist. We have forwarded this complaint to his office for review. Please expect him to contact you to schedule an inspection within the next 10 business days." Alex had to read that sentence twice, then a third time, letting the beautiful, delicious irony wash over him. The HOA, following its own rules to the letter, had received a complaint about the community arborist's trees and had, as required, formally forwarded that complaint to the community arborist himself for investigation. They were officially requesting that Alex, the homeowner, investigate a complaint filed against himself, acting in his official capacity as the designated expert. The bureaucratic loop was so perfect, so elegant in its absurdity, that he couldn't even be mad anymore. It was like a cartoon plot, where the villain's elaborate trap closes harmlessly around the villain himself. Brenda, in her quest to cause him trouble, had unwittingly handed him all the power. She thought she was reporting him to the authorities, but she had, in fact, just reported him to himself. A slow grin spread across Alex's face. He immediately began to compose a reply to the HOA board. He kept his tone perfectly professional, mirroring their own. "Thank you for forwarding this matter to my attention," he wrote. "I have received the complaint regarding 123 Maple Street and will open a case file immediately. I will contact the homeowner to schedule a full and thorough inspection of the trees in question. A detailed report will be submitted to the board upon completion of my assessment. Sincerely, Alex, certified arborist." He hit send, leaned back in his office chair, and let out a laugh that was pure, unadulterated joy. The game was on, and he was the referee, the star player, and the one who owned the stadium. Brenda had no idea what she had just set in motion, and Alex was going to make sure the finale was nothing short of spectacular. The situation was just too perfect. A gift from the gods of petty revenge. Alex was now officially tasked with investigating his own property, a conflict of interest so profound it circled all the way back around to being hilarious. He could have simply written a one-line report stating, "The trees are fine, case closed," and been done with it. That would have been efficient, but it would have been a wasted opportunity. Brenda had tried to create a public spectacle, to shame him and force his hand. A quiet, administrative dismissal wouldn't do. No. This moment called for theatre. It demanded a performance. Alex decided he would not only follow the HOA's procedure, but he would follow it with an absurd level of diligence and formality. He would give Brenda the full, professional inspection she had inadvertently requested. He let a few days pass, allowing the formal notice from the HOA to marinate in Brenda's mind. He wanted her to believe her complaint was being taken seriously, to imagine him anxiously awaiting the judgment of the official arborist. He wanted to build the tension, to set the stage for the main event. Then, on a bright and sunny Saturday morning, a time he knew Brenda would be home and tending to her petunias, he began his preparations. He didn't just wander outside in a t-shirt and jeans. He went into his work truck and emerged dressed in his full professional battle rattle. He donned a high-visibility jacket, emblazoned with his company's logo. He laced up his heavy, steel-toed work boots. He placed a pristine white hard hat squarely on his head. He was no longer Alex, the neighbor. He was the arborist, a serious professional on a serious mission. He armed himself with the tools of the trade, a clipboard stacked with official-looking forms, a high-end digital camera with a large telephoto lens, and various other measuring devices. He was going to give his own trees the most thorough, documented inspection of their long and healthy lives. And the best part? He had an audience of one, peeking through her blinds next door, completely oblivious to the fact that the entire production was being staged for her benefit. This wasn't just an inspection. It was the opening act of a play about consequences. The performance began. With his wife suppressing a giggle from the kitchen window, Alex took his theatrical production to the next level. He unrolled a long stretch of bright yellow caution tape and proceeded to string it up around the base of his own majestic oak trees. It was a ridiculous, unnecessary gesture that immediately transformed his front yard from a peaceful garden into what looked like a serious incident scene. To any passing neighbor, it would appear that a significant and potentially hazardous situation was under official investigation. This was a crucial part of the show, designed to catch the eye and fuel the imagination of his primary audience member, Brenda. Once the perimeter was secured, Alex began his inspection. He moved with a deliberate, methodical pace, projecting an aura of intense focus and expertise. He started with the clipboard, making a great show of ticking boxes and scribbling lengthy, inscrutable notes. He would pause, look up at a branch, squint his eyes in deep concentration, and then jot down another observation. He circled each tree, occasionally murmuring technical-sounding phrases just loud enough to potentially be overheard. Fascinating, he'd say to no one in particular. Excellent cambial response here. Then he would move on, pausing to note, textbook co-dominant stem inclusion, but it's been very well managed. He was essentially narrating a love letter to his own work, filled with arboricultural jargon that would sound both impressive and vaguely alarming to a layperson like Brenda. Next came the camera. He took dozens of photographs, the loud click of the shutter echoing in the quiet morning air. He shot the trunk from low angles, the canopy from afar, and close-ups of individual leaves. He was documenting the evidence with the thoroughness of a crime scene investigator. He could feel Brenda's eyes on him the entire time, a palpable presence from behind her living room curtains. He imagined her heart swelling with vindictive glee, certain that her complaint was being vindicated, that this very serious-looking man in the hard hat was cataloguing the proof that would bring her annoying, tree-loving neighbor to his knees. The grand finale of his yard inspection involved a tool he rarely used for a simple visual assessment, a soil sampler. He theatrically plunged the device into his own pristine lawn, extracting a core sample of earth, which he examined with the gravity of a geologist discovering a new mineral. He placed the sample into a labeled bag, another piece of evidence for his forthcoming report. After nearly an hour of this meticulous pantomime, he gathered his equipment, carefully took down the caution tape, and gave a final authoritative nod toward the trees before returning inside. Phase 1 of his masterful revenge was complete. The hook had been set. With the theatrical fieldwork complete, it was time for Alex to move on to the second act of his plan, the paperwork. The goal was not merely to clear his own name, but to do so in a way that was so overwhelmingly, crushingly professional that it would make Brenda's flimsy, emotional complaint look like the scribbling of a child. He dedicated the rest of his weekend to crafting a document that would become a masterpiece of malicious compliance. This would not be a simple letter. It would be a full, multi-page, official arborist's report. He fired up his computer and began to write, channeling every bit of his 20 years of experience into the document. He structured it like a formal scientific assessment, complete with a table of contents, an executive summary, and detailed sections for methodology, findings, and conclusions. He filled the report with dense, technical jargon, explaining the turgidity of the parenchyma cells and the unremarkable lenticel proliferation on the juvenile bark. He included a detailed analysis of the soil sample he had so theatrically collected, complete with charts showing the optimal pH balance and nutrient composition of his lawn. It was all true, of course, but presented with a level of scientific rigor that was utterly absurd for a simple neighborhood complaint. The high-resolution photographs he had taken were embedded throughout the report, but he didn't just insert the pictures, he annotated them. He drew bright green arrows pointing to features of exceptional vigor. He circled areas of new growth and labeled them evidence of robust apical meristem activity. He used a close-up of the bark to highlight its ideal moisture content and lack of any fungal hyphae. He was systematically, scientifically, and visually dismantling every single one of Brenda's baseless accusations. In the risk assessment section, he used the industry-standard matrix to evaluate the trees. He rated their health as a perfect 10-10, excellent, and their structural integrity as exemplary. The final risk factor was calculated to be extremely low, the safest possible rating. He didn't just say her claims were wrong, he produced a mountain of data-driven evidence to prove it. For the grand finale, in the executive summary, he delivered the killing blow, a sentence crafted with the precision of a surgeon. He wrote, "The assessment concludes that the trees at 123 Maple Street are not only safe, but represent an exemplary specimen of Quercus virginiana, contributing significantly to the neighborhood's aesthetic and ecological value. Any claims to the contrary are unfounded and likely stem from an untrained eye misinterpreting normal seasonal foliage changes." He printed the 10-page report on his official company letterhead, slid it into a glossy professional binder, and prepared for its delivery. But he wasn't finished. This glowing report was only the foundation. The real revenge was yet to come. On Monday morning, with the meticulously crafted report tucked into his briefcase, Alex walked over to the HOA president's house and hand-delivered the binder. He presented it with a serious and professional demeanor, stating, "This is the completed assessment for the complaint regarding 123 Maple Street." The president, a reasonable woman named Carol whom Alex had worked with for years, thanked him and assured him the board would review it. Alex knew that this first report, his triumphant self-vindication, would be the end of the matter as far as his own trees were concerned. The case would be closed, Brenda's complaint dismissed. But for Alex, this was no longer just about defending his oaks. It was about teaching a lesson. Brenda had tried to weaponize the HOA's rules against him. Now, he was going to turn that weapon back on her. As he walked home, he thought about the specific wording of her complaint. She hadn't just said the trees were ugly or overgrown. She had used the magic words, severe and imminent risk to property and life. It was this deliberate, dramatic escalation that had opened a door for him. He remembered a specific clause in the HOA bylaws, a section that dealt with how the association handles reports of serious hazards. He had helped the board draft that very clause years ago. It was a standard liability mitigation rule, one that was almost never invoked. But it was there, waiting. The clause stated that if a formal complaint alleging a direct threat to safety was filed, the HOA's contracted expert in this case, him was not only authorized but was required to conduct a full area assessment to ensure the safety of the entire community. The purpose was to identify if the reported hazard, like a tree disease or pest infestation, was a widespread problem affecting multiple properties. Brenda's melodramatic complaint had officially triggered this obscure but powerful bylaw. She had, in her attempt to get him in trouble, legally authorized him to inspect her own property. The irony was so thick he could taste it. His perfect glowing report on his own trees was just phase 1. Now, he began to plot phase 2. He would add a new section to his official submission to the board. Phase 2. Recommended Area Hazard Assessment. In it, he would state that due to the gravity of the allegations in the initial complaint, a cursory inspection of the adjacent properties was now a procedural necessity to ensure community safety. And the only property immediately adjacent, the one directly implicated by the area mentioned in the bylaw, belonged to Brenda. The plan for Phase 2 was taking shape, and it was a thing of legal and procedural beauty. Alex knew he couldn't just march onto Brenda's property. He had to follow the rules, the very rules she had set in motion. He was going to use the HOA's own framework as both his shield and his sword. His next move was to draft a second official document. This time, the recipient would not be the HOA board, but Brenda herself. He used his company's official letterhead, ensuring the document looked as serious and intimidating as possible. The letter was a masterpiece of cold, corporate detachment. It was addressed not to Brenda, but to the resident at 125 Maple Street. It read, "A recent complaint regarding potential arboricultural hazards in your immediate vicinity has been filed with the Homeowners Association. As the consulting arborist for the community, I am required by HOA bylaws to conduct a follow-up safety inspection on your property to ensure all trees and significant vegetation are in compliance with community safety and environmental standards." He chose his words carefully, linking his inspection directly to the complaint she herself had filed. He then informed her of the date and time. "I will be conducting this inspection on Wednesday at 10:00 a.m. To add a final dismissive touch of authority, he added the line, "Your presence is not required, as the inspection will be limited to vegetation visible from the street and common areas." This sentence was a power move, clearly stating that her permission was not needed. This was not a request. It was a notification. The process was already underway, thanks to her. He signed the letter not with his personal name, but with his title, Certified Arborist, HOA Consultant. He printed it, sealed it, in a matching business envelope, and in the evening, he walked over and placed it directly in her mailbox. The trap was set. Now, all he had to do was wait for Wednesday. He felt a thrill of anticipation. He had spent months passively observing Brenda's yard. He knew what was there. Unlike his own meticulously cared-for property, hers was a landscape of casual neglect. He knew, with professional certainty, that he was going to find violations. He wasn't going to have to invent them or exaggerate them as she had done. He was simply going to document the reality of her hazardous trees and invasive plants, and he was going to enjoy every single second of it. Wednesday morning arrived, bright and clear, the perfect weather for a day of reckoning. Alex once again prepared for his role, but this time, the performance was not just for show. This time, it was real. He donned his full professional attire, the high-visibility vest, the hard hat, the steel-toed boots. He gathered his clipboard, his camera, and his various measuring tools. He then got into his large work truck, the one with his company name and logo emblazoned in bold green letters on the side, and parked it directly on the street between his house and Brenda's. There could be no ambiguity about who he was and what he was doing there. It was a deliberate, public statement. As he stepped out of the truck, he glanced over at Brenda's house. As expected, a curtain twitched in the front window. He could just make out her silhouette. He imagined her reading his letter, the slow, dawning horror as she connected the dots and realized that the consulting arborist was the very man she had tried to attack. He saw her face briefly, pale and wide-eyed, before the curtain fell back into place. Alex offered a small, cheerful two-finger wave in her direction, a gesture that was simultaneously a folksy howdy and a cold, sharp checkmate. Then, he turned his full, professional attention to her yard. It didn't take an expert to see there were problems, but to his expert eye, it was a veritable goldmine of violations, a target-rich environment. He started his inspection at the front of the property, moving with the same methodical precision he had displayed in his own yard. But this time, his notes were not complimentary. His brow was furrowed in genuine concern, his scribbles on the clipboard detailing actual, documentable issues. The first and most obvious hazard was a large Bradford pear tree, situated dangerously close to her driveway and the street. To the average person, it might have looked fine, but to an arborist, it was a disaster waiting to happen. He began his assessment, the clicks of his camera documenting every flaw. He knew this was just the beginning. Her yard was a textbook case of deferred maintenance, and he was about to create a very, very expensive textbook. Alex focused his expert eye on the Bradford pear, a tree that arborists universally despise. They are infamous for their weak, brittle wood and their tendency to develop sharp, V-shaped junctions between branches. This structure, known as included bark, creates a point of profound weakness. Bradford pears are notorious for splitting in half during high winds or ice storms, their heavy limbs crashing down on whatever lies beneath. Brenda's tree was a particularly egregious example. It had been improperly pruned over the years, which had encouraged the growth of long, heavy, weakly attached branches. Several of these limbs were extending precariously over the public sidewalk and a portion of her driveway. It was a significant liability. On his clipboard, Alex meticulously documented the structural defects. He noted the multiple co-dominant stems with significant bark inclusion and the excessive end weight on primary scaffold limbs. He took numerous photos, zooming in on the weak branch unions and the stress fractures already beginning to form in the bark. He deemed it a moderate to high-risk hazard due to its condition and its potential targets pedestrians on the sidewalk and vehicles in the driveway. In his official report, he would strongly recommend its immediate and complete removal. He also took a moment to mentally calculate the cost of such a job. A tree of that size, located near power lines and public access, would require a skilled crew and careful work. He conservatively estimated the removal would cost her around $2,000. He made a neat note of the estimated cost next to the violation. One tree down, many more problems to go. He then moved on from the ticking time bomb in her front yard to the creeping menace along her property line. A row of overgrown, scraggly shrubs separated her property from the next neighbors. Woven through these bushes, like a parasitic infestation, was a thick, choking blanket of English ivy. This invasive vine is an ecological nightmare. It climbs and smothers native plants, starving them of sunlight. Its aggressive root system can damage building foundations, fences, and walkways. The HOA had a very specific bylaw, which Alex himself had helped write, strictly prohibiting the cultivation or unchecked growth of recognized invasive species like Hedera helix. Brenda's infestation was severe. The ivy was not only killing her shrubs, but was also starting to climb the shared fence. Alex documented the violation thoroughly, noting the severe infestation of Hedera helix and the violation of HOA Environmental Bylaw 7.4. The only proper remediation would be the professional removal of the ivy and, most likely, the removal of the host shrubs which were already too far gone to be saved. He estimated the cost for this labor-intensive work to be at least another $1,500. He added it to the running tally. The bill was growing, and he hadn't even gotten to the backyard yet. Having catalogued the expensive problems in the front yard, Alex continued his inspection, moving to a vantage point where he could see into Brenda's backyard from the common area behind the houses. And that's when he saw it. The main event, the crown jewel of her hazardous landscape. Towering in the back corner of her lot was a massive water oak, a tree that must have been close to a century old. But unlike his own vibrant, healthy oaks, this one was in a state of terminal decline. It was, without any exaggeration, the very definition of a hazardous tree, the exact thing she had falsely accused his trees of being. The irony was so potent, it was almost poetic. The tree was genuinely, visibly sick. From a distance, Alex could see the signs. There were large, barren branches in the upper canopy, a condition known as deadwood, which are essentially dead limbs waiting to snap off and fall. The trunk had a significant and alarming lean, not a gentle natural sweep, but a pronounced tilt directly towards the back of her own house. A direct hit from a falling limb, or the entire tree, would cause catastrophic damage to her roof and back rooms. As he got a closer look, more problems became apparent. There was a large, ugly scar running up the side of the trunk, likely from a past lightning strike or improper pruning, which had allowed decay to set in. Even more damning, there were visible fungal growths, or conchs, emerging from the bark at the base of the trunk. These shelf-like fungi are the fruiting bodies of an internal rot, a clear, unambiguous sign that the structural integrity of the tree's core had been compromised from the inside out. This tree wasn't just a risk, it was a severe and imminent threat, to use Brenda's own words. It was the kind of tree that keeps arborists up at night. He took out his camera and began documenting everything, his professional concern overriding his personal satisfaction for a moment. This was a genuinely dangerous tree that needed to come down immediately, regardless of the circumstances. He wrote up his findings, his pen flying across the page. Severe basal rot indicated by fungal conchs. Major deadwood present in upper 75% of canopy. Structurally unsound lean exceeding 15 degrees. He mandated a full and immediate removal of the tree. A job of this magnitude, requiring a crane and a highly skilled crew to dismantle the massive tree piece by piece without damaging her house, would be incredibly expensive. He estimated the cost to be anywhere from 50 to 70, perhaps more. He added it to the tally. The grand total for bringing her property into compliance with HOA safety standards was now hovering around the $10,000 mark. The inspection was complete. The case against Brenda was airtight, built not on lies and doctored photos, but on cold, hard, professional facts. With his fieldwork concluded, Alex returned to his office, the grim satisfaction of a job well done settling over him. Now came the crucial step of translating his findings into an official document that would be irrefutable. He set about creating his second report, the one detailing the litany of violations at 125 Maple Street. If his first report on his own trees was a love letter, this one was an indictment. He poured even more detail and professionalism into this document than the first. It was going to be a masterpiece of bureaucratic annihilation, an ironclad case that would leave Brenda with no wriggle room, no avenue for appeal. He started by formatting it identically to the first report, creating a parallel structure that would subtly highlight the stark difference in their findings. He included high-resolution, crystal-clear photographs of every issue he had identified. For the Bradford pair, he included diagrams illustrating the physics of included bark and why it leads to structural failure. For the English ivy, he included excerpts from environmental agency websites detailing the ecological damage it causes. For the hazardous water oak, he included close-up shots of the fungal conchs, with arrows pointing to the visible signs of decay. He even included a topographical map of her property showing the tree's potential fall radius, which encompassed a large portion of her house. Each violation was meticulously documented, and most importantly, cross-referenced with a specific bylaw from the HOA's own rulebook. He cited the exact paragraph and subsection for each infraction. The overgrown Bradford pear violated the bylaw regarding maintaining trees so as not to pose a risk to public sidewalks. The ivy violated the Prohibition of Invasive Species bylaw. The dying oak violated the main clause concerning homeowner responsibility to remove hazardous or dead trees. He was building a legal cage for her, and the bars were made from the very rules she had tried to use against him. To complete the report, he included a section with professional cost estimates. He didn't just pull numbers out of the air. He called 2 reputable local tree service companies without mentioning the address or names, of course, and got ballpark quotes for the removal of trees of similar size and complexity. This ensured his estimates were accurate and defensible. The final report was a 15-page document of doom. It was clear, concise, data-driven, and utterly damning. He printed it, placed it in another glossy binder, and prepared to submit it to the HOA board. He knew they would have no choice but to act on it. He was their contracted expert, and this was his official, professional recommendation. To ignore it would be to open the HOA itself up to massive liability. Brenda had started a fire, and it was about to engulf her own house. Alex submitted the second, damning report to the HOA president, Carol. He did so with a simple professional email. Carol, please find my attached report for the area hazard assessment conducted at 125 Maple Street, as required by the initial complaint. Please let me know if you have any questions. He didn't need to add any commentary or explanation. The report spoke for itself. The very next day, his phone rang. It was Carol. Her voice was a mixture of shock and disbelief. Alex, she said, practically sputtering. I got your report for Brenda's house. Are you serious? $10,000 in mandatory work? Alex kept his tone calm, professional, and firm. He was no longer her neighbor. He was the HOA's consulting arborist, advising them on a matter of legal liability. Every word of it is true, Carol, and every violation is documented with photographic evidence and a corresponding bylaw, he replied. From a professional and legal standpoint, those trees, especially that water oak, are a significant liability, not just to the homeowner, but to the HOA. If that oak comes down in a storm and damages her house, and our records show that we were officially notified of it being a hazard and did nothing, the HOA could be found negligent in a lawsuit. We have a legal duty to act on this report. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Carol was processing the implications. She knew he was right. Alex was the expert they paid precisely to identify these kinds of risks and protect the association from lawsuits. His official report had put them on the clock. They could not ignore it. Okay, Alex, I understand, she finally said, her voice heavy. We'll have the board review it, but I see your point. We'll have to issue a notice. The wheels of justice, which Brenda had so eagerly set in motion, were now rolling unstoppably in her direction. A week later, a certified letter from the HOA's management company was delivered to Brenda's doorstep. It required a signature, ensuring she couldn't claim she never received it. Inside the envelope was a copy of Alex's full 15-page report, complete with the damning photos and cost estimates. Accompanying it was a formal notice of violation. The letter stated in cold legal terms that she had 30 days to complete the full removal of the Bradford pear and the water oak, and to professionally remediate the invasive ivy infestation. Failure to comply within the 30-day window would result in the HOA hiring its own contractors to perform the work, and then placing a lien on her property for the full amount, plus administrative fees. She was well and truly trapped. There was no escape. Brenda, as one might expect from a person of her temperament, did not accept her fate quietly. The formal notice from the HOA sent her into a rage. She was cornered, and she came out fighting, albeit with no legitimate weapons in her arsenal. Her first move was a furious phone call to Carol, the HOA president, where she reportedly screamed for 10 minutes straight about being targeted, harassed, and retaliated against. Carol, to her credit, calmly informed her that the HOA was simply following procedure based on the official report from their contracted expert, a procedure that was initiated by Brenda's own complaint. Thwarted by the HOA's administrative front, Brenda then tried to rally public opinion. She went to a few of the other neighbors, attempting to paint a picture of herself as the victim of a vindictive conspiracy led by the crazy tree guy next door. This tactic backfired spectacularly. Most of the neighbors had already had their own minor, unpleasant run-ins with Brenda and were not inclined to be sympathetic. Furthermore, Alex was a long-standing, well-liked member of the community. When Brenda showed them the notice, they saw not a conspiracy, but a list of legitimate problems they had all noticed about her neglected yard for months. They offered her no support. Her final desperate gambit was to confront Alex directly. She stormed over to his property one evening as he was getting out of his car. "You did this!" she shrieked, waving the violation notice in her hand. "This is a vendetta because I reported your dangerous trees." Alex remained perfectly calm. He looked at her, then at the notice, and said with a quiet, devastating simplicity, "No, Brenda, you did this. I just did the job you asked the HOA to have me do. My report on your property is factual. Your report on mine was not. If you have an issue with the facts, you'll have to take it up with the HOA board." He then turned, walked into his house, and closed the door, leaving her sputtering alone in his driveway. The culmination of her fury came at the next monthly HOA meeting. It was an open meeting, held in the community clubhouse, and Brenda came prepared for a showdown. She had signed up for a slot during the open forum, and when her turn came, she marched to the podium and unleashed a tirade. She accused Alex of corruption, of abusing his power, of faking his report. She painted herself as the brave whistleblower being punished for speaking truth to power. She demanded that the board throw out his retaliatory report and sanction him instead. The performance was dramatic, loud, and utterly unconvincing. When she finally ran out of steam, the HOA president, Carol, responded with brutal efficiency. She calmly held up a folder. "Ma'am," she began, her voice steady and clear. "This entire process, from the first inspection to the notice you received, was started because you filed this formal complaint." She held up Brenda's original email, the one filled with lies about Alex's trees. "Our arborist, as required by the bylaws you agreed to when you bought your home, followed up on your complaint. He investigated your claims, which he found to be baseless. Then, as a precaution stipulated in our rules for a hazard complaint of this nature, he assessed the surrounding area, which included your property. His report on your yard contains 15 pages of photographic evidence and cites specific bylaw violations. Are you claiming that he, a licensed and insured professional with a 20-year career, fabricated these photographs? Are you suggesting he is lying in his official, signed report, an action that could cost him his license and his business?" Carol paused, letting the questions hang in the silent room. "Because unless you have evidence to that effect, the board stands by our expert's assessment. You have 22 days left to comply with the notice." Brenda stood at the podium, her face crimson. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. There was nothing to say. She had been so thoroughly, so publicly, and so politely checkmated that all the fight drained out of her. She gathered her papers and slunk back to her seat, defeated. The lesson was complete. The final act was simply watching the consequences unfold. Over the next few weeks, Alex had a front-row seat to the fruits of his labor. He watched with immense satisfaction as a crew from a professional tree service arrived to dismantle the hazardous Bradford pear. A few days later, a landscaping crew spent a full day ripping out the ivy-choked shrubs. The grand finale was the arrival of the massive crane and the team of skilled arborists to take down the dying water oak. It was a complex, all-day job, and the sound of chainsaws was music to Alex's ears. Brenda was forced to spend a significant amount of money, the roughly $10,000 Alex had estimated, all because she couldn't resist the urge to be a malicious neighbor. She never made eye contact with him again. She would quickly retreat inside her house if she saw him get his mail. The passive-aggressive notes stopped. The complaints ceased. A quiet, peaceful harmony returned to their corner of the neighborhood, purchased at the cost of Brenda's savings and her pride. Alex could finally enjoy his beautiful, healthy trees in peace, with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that he had served justice, not with anger, but with overwhelming, unassailable professionalism.